also asked for permission to record. I always get confused when it's like, hello, Otter would like to record. I'm like, go ahead. It's going to be on YouTube. It's all good. So welcome everybody. We will keep letting people in as they arrive. If you have just gotten here to the Writer's Bridge, please do drop into the chat where you're coming from, what you're currently working on. I am going to hit the mute all button so that we don't get your dogs and children and loved ones in the background. So our guests will need to unmute themselves when the time is right. But welcome. So glad to have you here. So glad to have you as part of the Writer's Bridge community. We did not end up doing last month, so sorry for the false alarm. If you are on my newsletter, we kind of canceled that at the last minute. Stuff happened. Life happened. We embraced our creative selves and said, hey, what the heck? We're going to do August. August is going to be amazing. And we have some pretty amazing guests today, which I am super, super excited about. The world of traditional publishing has really shifted in recent years. So what can we still count on? How do we win a traditional publishing contract? What do we expect once we get that contract? Is it true we're going to have to do all our own promo? Our special guests are going to share with us what to expect, what to give, what to get, and how the whole traditional publishing experience comes together. Before we introduce them, hey, Sharla, what's coming up with Craft Talks webinars?
Hello, everyone. Is my volume good?
Yep.
All right, wonderful. So tomorrow we have Supercharge Your Writing, The Secret of Narrative Distance with Peter Mountford, who will teach us how to master narrative distance, a subtle art crucial for transforming our prose. Join us to learn how this technique can instantly resolve numerous writing challenges and significantly improve your storytelling craft. I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat. Allison, how about you? What's happening in your world?
Well, I have a fun Craft Talks intersection coming up, and we actually have Rebecca Morrison here today as well. So Rebecca, go ahead and unmute yourself and say hi. Rebecca and I are going to be teaching a class on pitching and publishing your essays, getting your work out there into the world, both as work itself and also to support your book and build your audience. Hey, Rebecca, do you have one quick tip for us as we move forward?
Yeah, sure. In terms of pitching, what I say is the process and timing of a pitch is sometimes can be just as important as the pitch itself. Understanding which editors, what they like, knowing the publication, those are the things. Just a little bit of what Allison and I are going to be sharing with you. I'm so excited about it. It's a two-part
Masterclass.
Masterclass. It's going to be amazing. We're going to have so much fun. I'd love to see any of you joining us.
Fantastic. And we will drop that link in the chat. Thanks, Rebecca. I got to say, Rebecca, your words about timing is important were in my ears today as I saw a call for pitches on Twitter and she said, just pitch me in the DMs. And I thought this has got to be low stress, low commitment. It's a Twitter DM. How bad can it be? And I dictated that mofo in my car and fingers crossed it happens. But you know what? I send it into the world and then I forget it ever existed because it's not a project I care a whole lot about. It's just something that I think would be fun for that particular pitch. Timing is everything. And our two guests are going to talk to us about how you make the timing work for you. Sharla, tell us, who are our beautiful guests?
We have Ariel Curry and Liz Morrow, who also have taught on Craft Talks before, so I'm really excited that they've decided to come back on Writer's Bridge. Ariel is a writer, editor, and book coach at Ariel Curry Editorial with over 10 years of experience in traditional publishing. She works as an acquisitions editor at Source Books for 2 years now, and she now ghostwrites and helps other aspiring nonfiction authors. And Liz Morrow is a traditionally published ghostwriter for entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business experts. She specializes in personal and professional development and memoir. She's written books for Penguin Random House, Hay House, Harper One, HarperCollins, Leadership, Bloomsbury, and Baker Books. Together, Liz and Ariel have just published Hungry Authors, The Indispensable Guide to Planning, Writing, and Publishing a Nonfiction Book, all about how any author with a great idea, a boatload of gumption, and a plan can write and publish a kick-ass nonfiction book. Thank you for being here today, both of you. Welcome.
Welcome. Welcome, Liz and Ariel.
Thank you so much for having us. It's such an honor to be here.
So we're going to dive right in. In Hungry Authors, you both talk about finding your big idea, capital B, capital I, big idea. So what makes a big idea, and how do you know if your idea is big?
Well, great question. Also, just right off the top, I wanted to mention I've seen some questions in the chat about fiction. And so we will do although our book has nonfiction in the title, everything we will say also can apply to fiction. And so we will make sure that our answers pretty equally apply to fiction. So I just wanted to make sure that fiction writers don't feel left out off the rip.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so capital B, big, capital I, idea. A big idea is basically something that contributes something new to a conversation that's already happening. What we mean by that is your big idea, whether it's nonfiction, either in something prescriptive nonfiction, like a personal development book, a big idea book, thought leadership, or a memoir, or a fiction book, has to be timely in that it addresses something that is going on in the zeitgeist, something pretty prescient, a topic that people are talking about, that there is interest in, if it's fiction, a genre that people are reading, and sort of there is a trend going on. And you have to have a unique point of view on that topic, on that conversation. One time I heard an editor say to me, tell me something I don't know about a topic I already love. So your unique point of view, your take, your angle has to contribute something new. So that doesn't have to be new information necessarily. A take, and of course we go into this in our book, so this answer will be fairly brief compared to what else could be said about it that we say in our book. So if you want lots of examples of how to come up with that unique angle, because that's kind of the hard part, you can consume some other material that we have. But basically, you can voice can be kind of a part of your unique angle. You can combine two ideas that haven't been combined before. Again, your point of view. One of the best ways that we tell people to go mining for a big idea, because you can sit and sort of hope that the muse comes to you, and sometimes that happens, but a lot of times professional writers, we have to go looking for these big ideas. You can find them. There is a little bit of a science to this. The first thing we always say to do is read in your genre, read your comp books. Most of you guys, if you're in the writer world at all, you probably are familiar with your comp books, comparative or competitive books that sort of sit beside the shelf of the book, sit on the shelf beside your book that you want to write. Read those. Figure out if there's something missing, if there's something that's not being said, a line that you want to draw, a place where you disagree with a lot of what's being said. So read your comp books and figure out what new thing you want to contribute to a conversation that's already happening. Ariel, what else am I forgetting about big idea?
I would just add, I think you covered it beautifully, but I would just add that it's really important. I think of your big idea like, this is the argument that I'm making. This is the point that I want to prove through my story or through my nonfiction book or through my memoir. This is the thing that I believe now that I want to prove to my readers. And I want, by the end of the book, I want them to believe this truth as well. Even if it's something controversial, even if it's something, debatable, and hopefully it is something debatable and controversial, because they will remember it so much better that way. So like for us, the big idea of our book is any writer with the gumption and a plan can write and publish a kick-ass nonfiction book. That is debatable. Not everyone believes that. But we believe it. And we hope that by the end of our book, we hope to convince you of that truth as well. So that's just an example, but there are lots of examples you could look at for big ideas too.
So thinking about big ideas, I'm thinking about, say, Jenny Lawson, the blogess, let's pretend this never happened, broken in the best possible way. From the outside, I would maybe identify Jenny's big idea as, I'm struggling with mental health and it's not okay and I'm not better, but I'm really funny.
Yes. Yes. I love that you picked Jenny Lawson because number one, I'm obsessed with her. And I went to a reading of hers in Seattle one time and it was like probably the best book event I've ever been to. She's the best. She's so cool. And you identified a memoir, which memoir can be one of the harder genres to do this for because sometimes with those prescriptive books, it's a little bit easier. You know exactly what you're teaching. You sort of know exactly, you've got a message. Maybe you might have been honing that, but memoir and anything kind of narrative, like Ariel said, you still have to be making an argument. Like, I think you nailed it, that Jenny Lawson, her big idea of that memoir, her argument, her point of view is something like, I'm like mental illness can be funny. Mental health, you can struggle with mental illness and still have a beautiful life. You can be, sick and have a lot of joy,
And her book came out at a time when most of the books about mental health were how people got better.
Yes, yes. And if
Right.
you notice in so many of the stories that she tells, not only are they absolutely hilarious, which is another thing I would actually make an argument that something that makes her particularly unique is her voice is just so strong. She's honed it. You're reading Jenny Lawson and you know it's Jenny Lawson. Like she doesn't write like anybody else. And that probably just takes practice. But her
And you
story,
either love her or you hate her. And that's
yes,
something too, I think, when
exactly.
we embrace the big idea, we have to understand that if it's a good big idea, there's going to be people who vehemently disagree with us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly like Ariel
Exactly.
said. Mhm.
What about little ideas? If you feel like, oh, I just have a little idea, is there a way to make that into a big idea?
Usually, if it's a little idea, it just means that the scope is too small. So we actually use the term little big idea to describe what needs to be in your chapters. So a little big idea might be something that is appropriate for a chapter. And kind of the key way to know that is that, one discrete thing changes. If you're writing memoir, then there's one key change, either, something negative to something positive or something positive, something negative. There's one discrete change that happens in your story. Or for a prescriptive nonfiction book, it's like, this is one piece of a bigger message, one piece of a bigger transformation that's trying to be accomplished. So if you think your idea is little and you're like, I actually don't have that much to say about this thing, I would ask you to ask yourself, how can you broaden that? Or like, what are the bigger ramifications of that big idea? How does it apply in other areas of life? It may just be that you need to find, kind of the timeless piece of it so that it applies to more facets of life, and then it can become a big idea, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Rebecca points out in the chat, this is also true for pitching op-eds. We need an opinion on something that we're all talking about that some people will not agree with. And Allison Lane points out, you hope you get detractors because otherwise you're not making enough waves. Yeah, this is so interesting. Can you give us an example of maybe how you've helped a writer or how you yourself have taken a little idea and turned it into a big idea?
I think on the fly here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should I start humming the Jeopardy theme song? So I'll tell you what, imagine that
Yeah.
you're coaching Sharla. And Sharla has an idea that we were talking about. Sharla, you are teaching in an environment where the rooms are all attractively decorated, but it does not necessarily make a great teaching location. So Sharla's going to write a book that is all about how your location makes your class better or worse. Is that a big enough idea?
Well, something actually occurred to me as you were talking that this maybe this maps onto your Charlotte example there, but I helped a incredible woman a few months ago work on a book proposal. She is a director of an editorial director of photography for in commercial magazines, worked for some really big successful places helping photographers break into commercial photography. And she wanted to write a book to help photographers get into commercial photography. And she wanted to publish it traditionally. And as qualified as she is to write that book, I, thought it's pretty niche. It's pretty narrow. Now, if you want to write that book and that's just your audience and you feel very passionate about it, like go for it. But know that if you want to get it into a traditional publishing house, especially a bigger one, they are going to say, well, how many people even want that? It's pretty small audience, pretty niche. But as we got to talking, I began to push her a little bit about like, okay, so you're helping people break into this sort of gate-kept creative community. Don't you think that those strategies might work for other creative industries? Does this have to be for people only wanting to get into creative or, commercial photography? Couldn't this work for graphic designers trying to take the next step in graphic design, or, people trying to get into some other kind of creative industry? And it turned out that like, yes, like a lot of what she was saying was applicable in other areas. And so it became more a book about, creating, like advancing your creative career no matter what you want to do. And so sometimes it's about that. It's that particular idea was, about audience. The audience is what made it too small. It was too narrow. But like Ariel said, it's about looking at like, how can this map onto other people, other areas of life, broaden that audience, and help more people, still with her unique point of view. A lot of what made her value proposition is her background in photography. She was the gatekeeper, so she has that unique point of view. She has special things to say about that. But it doesn't have to just be for photographers. We widened those gates a lot audience wise. And so, yeah, does that help explain a little bit?
I think it does. Is that what you mean by framing? What is framing? I hear that a lot. What do we need to know how to do it? And what is that action?
Yeah. That is a good example of framing. So often framing is kind of the way that you are, and this is another complex term you'll hear a lot, positioning, the way you are positioning an idea for a specific market. So when we talk about framing, aka positioning, we're talking about how does this idea, or where does this idea contribute to this broader conversation? So often it does start with, who is the audience? What else are they already reading? What ideas are they already familiar with? And how does what you have to say offer something new and different and, positively contributing to that ultimate conversation? So I often think of it like you walk into a restaurant and there's all these tables where different conversations are happening. And so that author thought she was going to be at the photography table, but the photography table has like 3 people in it. So we're like, actually, your message could be really applicable at the creative careers table, which has 20 people at it. So maybe that would be a better table to go sit at, where your book is going to reach a much broader audience of people and have a much bigger impact. And it's going to reach the photography people too that you're trying to reach. So I don't know if that helps to explain framing. It's about how you are differentiating yourself, but also still contributing something new to that broader conversation.
And I love that in our chat, Jan actually came up with a great idea. So Sharla might want to start writing a book about how she is teaching in a room that is, and I am not making this up, themed around, is it like Baroque French? Is it like Louis XIV French? She's teaching in a classroom that is really lovely and not entirely great to teach in. And Jan suggests in the chat, the book you're going to write is about making the room bigger, how everything makes a difference in teaching: training, attitude, experience, respect between students and teacher, support provided by community and admin. All of these are the room you're teaching in. And Jan, you're going to have to write that book, because that sounds amazing.
It's a great title.
Yeah.
That is beautiful.
Yeah. Love it. When we're framing, I know a lot of our writers want to know this. Do we have to write a proposal? Do we have to write the whole book? Which comes first? Why would one come before the other one?
Yeah, well, it depends on what you're writing. So first of all, we would say that writing a book proposal for any writer is going to be a really awesome exercise in making a plan for success for your book. So even if you plan on self-publishing, a book proposal is like a business plan. So imagine that you were going to pitch a business idea and you want to borrow a loan from a bank, they're going to ask for your business plan, right? Because they want to make sure that you're going to actually be able to repay that loan that they give you with interest. So a book proposal is the same kind of thing. Even if you are the person who's investing in that business, even if you are self-funding that business or that book, you want to know that you're going to get a substantial return on the investment of your time and energy, just as a publisher would want to know that they're going to get a return on the investment for them if they invest in your book idea and agree to publish your book. So looking at a book proposal from that perspective as this is a plan to make my book successful, regardless of how I publish it, 1,000% it is going to be worthwhile for anyone to go through that exercise for yourself. And it's just massively clarifying on what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, and how you're going to accomplish it. So yes, the question about do you have to have the entire manuscript done or how much do you have to have done, that differs by genre. So if you're writing prescriptive nonfiction or even memoir, often you don't have to have the entire thing done. You just have to pitch a sample so that the publisher has faith that you will be able to do the whole thing. They get to know your writing style. They have confidence that you're going to be able to engage readers throughout an entire 60 to 80,000 word book. If you're writing fiction, you do have to have the entire manuscript finished in most cases, unless you've already got a positive track record of lots of successful fiction books, then they might not require that. Again, they might just take it on spec, we would call it. But for the most part, you're going to want to finish the manuscript because an editor is going to want to know that you can nail the ending, right? Because fiction, the ending is so incredibly important, and being able to see that entire transformation of the character arc is so critical to a successful book. So that's kind of the difference there.
Lovely. Allison says in the chat, the proposal gives clarity about the potential earnings, audience, and the competitive environment. It's such a time-saving effort. I often don't think of it as time-saving. I think it's just going to distract me from what I really want to do is write. But I think you've made a really good pitch for doing the proposal. If, let's say, we work on a proposal, we're accepted by a traditional publisher, what can we expect from that relationship?
Go ahead, Liz.
Well, again, it's going to differ by genre. Ariel and I, of course, have most experience with nonfiction relationships with publishers. So if you have acquired an agent and sold a book based on a book proposal, which means you've almost certainly are so if you're writing a nonfiction book, you have to have a pretty extensive proposal and a query letter, of course. And so, okay, let's say you get signed, then they're going to sign you a contract, and then you've actually got to go write the book, because most nonfiction books get pitched as an idea with a couple chapters, but the book isn't actually written yet. So they're gonna give you a timeline. Usually, it varies, but 6 to 9 months most of the time, in my experience, to go out and write it. And we love traditional publishing. We both work Ariel does now exclusively. I almost exclusively work with traditional publishers. But I would say, in the most loving way, they almost always offer you a lot less help than you expect them to. And when it comes to the writing and the editing and the communication, that's why, as like Ariel talked about with the book proposal, they, as you're communicating your business plan, another thing that they're looking for is people who are going to be a partner. They're going to be active, have a lot of agency, take a lot into your own hands, not just with the promotion, but with the writing. So I'm sure, you will get an edit at the end once you turn in your rough draft after that 6 to 9 months where you go off and write it. But a lot of people who have traditional publishing deals, they still often end up hiring an outside book coach and spending their own money on that, or spending part of their advance on that, or a developmental editor, because publishers don't, often offer that level of editing, especially if you're a first timer and you want some extra help. But I mean, bottom line is you go off and write it, then you turn it in, then they edit it for you. And then you have a back and forth where you implement those edits, and that goes on for a couple months where you turn it in, get it back, turn it in, get it back, refine it. And then, you know, it's usually like at least 18 months from when you sign the deal to when the thing is actually done and out in the world. Traditional publishing has a long timeline. Now, fiction, of course, because the book is done, there's still, you know, you don't have to necessarily write it, but they're still going to give you an edit on it. You're still going to have to do a lot of revising. It doesn't necessarily mean by any means that the work is like done just because you've written it. But, you know, it looks a little bit different because you're not starting from totally zero, which is kind of in nonfiction you sometimes are. I mean, you've got like a sample or two written for the proposal, but in general, the manuscript doesn't exist yet. So I guess that's a broad overview of how it works.
Well, and I've been talking to a publisher and a potential agent about my next book. And trying to sort of broaden my frame, as it were. One of the things that I learned talking to a new agent was that some small publishers are only doing print on demand. They're not doing a press run. And that's something that can really affect how many places your book shows up. And so if you want to work with a small publisher, one of the questions to ask is, for distribution, are you only doing print on demand, or are you also doing a press run? And that's something that we might not know to ask. Is there anything else that we don't necessarily know to ask it, but we should?
Oh my goodness. Yes, there are many, many things. I do like if you are in conversation with an editor, I recommend asking for ask them for kind of a detailed, you know, perspective on what the schedule is going to look like. When do they plan on publishing your book? You know, how does that fit in with their other plans for other books? Do they have a lot of other books publishing at the same time? Because that'll give you a sense of like, how much attention are you going to get in relation to, you know, obviously publishers have a lot of books on their plate. So there's a lot going on at any season for a publisher. The other thing you can ask is like, what will a developmental edit look like? Because like Liz said, you will get some notes, but the extent of those notes differs widely based on the editor that you're working with, how much time they have at the time that they're reading your manuscript, and just kind of the culture at the publishing house that you're talking to. Some publishers are heavy on the development, like they really invest in development. They give their editors lots of time to do development, and other publishers are like, you're the author, you're the expert on the content. It's kind of your job to do that, right? So it just kind of depends. And it's good to get kind of a sense from, you know, from that perspective of like, what is the company's kind of cultural perspective on development and how much support you're going to get that way. You can ask things like, how often are royalties reported? How often are royalties paid? What does advance structures typically look like? A lot of people don't realize advances aren't just like one big lump of money, but they're spaced out based on, you know, you get a little bit when you sign the contract, you get a little bit more when you deliver the manuscript, you might get a little bit more when the book publishes. So there are lots of ways that publishers can slice and dice things, and lots of different ways that the contract can look. And so asking questions about like, what's typical, you know, for your contracts, what's typical for your timelines, that'll just help you get a sense for not only what to expect with any one publisher, but also what you can ask for and what you can negotiate, right? Because all of those things are negotiable.
Right.
So that's some advice there.
Thank you. Eileen has a question in the chat. Liz and Ariel, what do you have to say about when to pitch to the publisher and when to take the intermediate step of recruiting an agent?
Yeah. Really good question. So I would almost always, if you want to traditionally publish, I would recommend getting an agent. I'm a big fan of agents. Ariel and I are represented. And a really great resource on this is Get Signed by Lucinda Halpern. Like, disclaimer, I was the collaborator on that book, so I'm a little bit biased, but and she represents me in collaboration. She's a dear friend of mine and my agent. But in that book, oh, look at this. I didn't even plan that. But she it's find an agent, land a book deal, and become a published author. Anything you could ever want to know about getting an agent, their value, what they bring to the process is just in this book. So I'm always pro agent. Now, there are smaller publishers and presses that you don't need an agent to get signed by them. So you don't necessarily need one, but they will almost always only help in the process in like myriad ways. But if you are a first-time author and you want a traditional publishing deal, especially one at a bigger house, you will almost always need to have an agent to get noticed by the editors that you want to get noticed by. When to do that? Well, when you've nailed your pitch. So most you'll want to have like a pretty good working book proposal. So look into how to do that well. There's lots of great resources on that. But you also want to have your big idea nailed down really well. You want to have that pitch, again, like nailing your pitches in that book if you want some really good, like granular tips on how to do that. But like, it's basically your elevator pitch, how you're describing your book, your query. A lot of this will go into a query letter. And now it's a query email basically, but like a paragraph or two where you really can concisely explain your idea, why it's prescient, why it's needed right now, and and how it fits into the marketplace. So once you can do that well, you can start pitching agents. Now, like just refining, I will say, like refining those couple of sentences, those paragraphs or two of that pitch might take you months. Like it's a very short amount of information, but there's a quote that I always get wrong and misattribute. So but I'm just going to take a stab at it. It's basically like someone like writes a long letter and he's like, I'm so sorry, if I had had more time, I would have been brief. So the point is like writing something that concise takes a lot of time. But once you can do that and you're really clear on your comps and how your book and your unique point of view fits into the marketplace, you can start pitching, especially if you've got agents that you've had your eye on for a little while and you'd really like to start building a relationship. Even if you pitch and they say, no, we're not right now, or, give you some sort of feedback, fine. Like take that feedback, refine it, pitch them again, ask them if you can follow up in a couple months, like always be pitching. Like there's really no, if you've got that pitch down, then yeah, go for it. And you will, if you do a good job, they're going to ask you for a full book proposal. So you kind of do want to have that, either done or at least mostly done so you can get that off to them right away. But and sometimes some of them do require the full book proposal right up front. Just disclaimer, you can look at like the agency's website and follow all they all have their own special rules. But it all comes down to your big idea and how well you can describe it.
Ariel, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah. I would just add that sometimes the timing does kind of make a critical difference in whether you might get a book deal or not. For example, I have a proposal on my desk that I'm looking at and I'm like, oh my God, it is so well written. I love the idea. It's so good, but it's prescriptive nonfiction and this author has zero platform. And I'm like, it just kills me a little bit because I'm like, this is so good, but it's not going to sell if the author is not out there getting this message heard by an audience. So especially for prescriptive nonfiction, and we can talk about platform too, because I think platform expectations definitely differ based on genre and lots of factors. But for prescriptive nonfiction especially, it is so important to spend the time at least getting a flywheel going. You have to have some kind of audience. Whether it's Substack or social media, it does not have to be social media. It can be, something that you feel really comfortable with. It can be articles on, major publications. It can be whatever medium you are comfortable with. But the point is, especially for prescriptive nonfiction, you really should invest in developing some kind of audience. There's no right number to it, but at least being able to demonstrate, hey, I know how to gather an audience around this message. That is going to be so much more persuasive to publishers than even just the audience, or just the idea and the writing, as wonderful as they may be. Sometimes
Something
it's
I
enough, but
advise
Yeah.
Something I advise memoirists about too is if they're not already public speakers, they can at least start identifying what groups care about the issue that I'm writing about, because some of those groups have associations, which have newsletters that you can write an article for, and conferences where you can meet other people who are interested in this topic. And I think we do sometimes feel a little sad about the fragmented nature of social media, when in fact, a lot of platform is not social media. A lot of platform is personal connections around an issue that people care about.
Right. I have a question for you, Ariel, from Deborah. Source books used to accept memoirs directly from writers. Is that still true?
They do. You can always pitch a memoir proposal to us. I will say that memoir is a hard sell, as I know, and I hate to repeat that because I know it is common in the industry, but it is also true. I will say what I've seen work well with memoirs. So like Sourcebooks just published a memoir called Wanted: Toddler's Personal Assistant. And that's a great example of a memoir that is doing really, really well out the gate. It's selling really crazy. We had a really big bulk order from Barnes and Noble. That's really exciting. And what makes that book and a lot of great memoirs work really well is that there's a really unique perspective or a really unique, thing that happened in the author's life that they're able to tell about and kind of shed light on this really crazy, unique experience, but obviously also still have a really compelling big idea that they're delivering as well.
Love that. Absolutely love that. We have both questions in the chat, and we had an advanced question that came in from Victoria. It's very tough to get an agent. Are there good resources to find them? She finds the Poets and Writers database really difficult to navigate. Publishers Marketplace has info, but it's not really a way that you can find publishers who don't require agents. How do you locate the publishers who don't need the agents?
There's a lot of editors on manuscriptwishlist.com, including myself, including a lot of other editors that I know, even from Big Five publishing imprints that they have, and you can find their emails on manuscriptwishlist.com. So definitely go there because you will be surprised at how many people are accessible to authors who even are unagented. So that's probably my best recommendation is manuscriptwishlist.com, since you've already tried Publishers Marketplace and Poets and Writers.
All right. I'm going to grab a question from the chat. Is it an advantage, asset, or disadvantage if you have 10 years of speaking experience, live events, podcasts, radio interviews, TV, but the previous experience is not relevant to your current topic or genre? Like, what if you have reach, but it is different than what you're going to be writing or publishing on?
And I'll give you guys an example. I spent almost 20 years as a professional circus performer. I have been on many television shows while wearing spandex and waving a fire torch or hanging from a trapeze. This has very little to do with my book about editing.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make a correlation.
Oh, I do. You should see my slides.
It's not a disadvantage. No one's gonna like ding you for it. But it's not probably a huge advantage. The point that Ariel made about platform, especially if you're writing something, memoir or especially prescriptive nonfiction, where publisher agents and publishers want to see some sort of built-in audience. They want to see that you're already out there talking about this, that, you have some sort of vehicle to sell your book, which almost always means people who like you for the thing that you're writing about, and want more of that from you. If your audience or some of your experience is completely unrelated, again, it's not a disadvantage, but it would not be like a huge advantage. Like if I wanted to write a fiction book, when Ariel and I wrote our book proposal for Hungry Authors and our subsequent, books that we want to write on writing, a huge advantage is that we are in the industry. We have tons of contacts. We have, we are known for that. We have a podcast about it. But if I want to write a fiction book, that's not really going to help me. It might help me. It's great for them to know that like I'm capable of writing well and, know people, but like, I don't expect my, clients with, hundreds of thousands of followers to help me out if I want to write a fiction book, I don't know,
Right.
Ariel, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if you can make a really good case that that audience will care about this new thing for whatever reason, and you can, really make that compelling in the proposal, then go for it. But I often think about Ryan Holiday. He talks often about, his story of how he was writing these marketing books that sold really, really well. And his publisher was like, great, just keep doing that, keep turning out these marketing books. And he was like, well, I really want to write this book on ancient philosophy about this stoicism. And they were like, I don't know about that, man. And he has talked many times on his podcast about how he got a really small advance for his book on stoicism. And they were basically like, look, we like you enough that we'll let you like chase this little, side interest, but like go get it out of your system, basically was kind of their message to him. But like, go do it, it's gonna fail, and then come back to marketing books. Well, now we have the Daily Stoic, and we've got, he's been on the New York Times he's always on the New York Times bestseller list when he has a new book come out. And, his books on stoicism have done many times as well as his books on marketing. So if you really believe in this thing that is outside of your wheelhouse, don't let that stop you. Still go for it. Just be realistic about the challenges and the hurdles that you're going to face and have a plan for overcoming them.
I like
Especially
that.
if that audience does care about you as a person. Like, wouldn't you say Ryan
Yeah.
Holiday's audience, like he, as much as he talked about marketing, they actually cared about him and his point of view in general, which I think probably helped with the stoicism stuff,
Yeah.
Like kind of Jenna Kutcher too. Someone brought up Jenna Kutcher in the chat earlier about how like, she was a photographer and got her start, doing marketing. Most of her income still comes from like a Pinterest course and a podcast course and an Instagram course. Her book is called, like, her book is basically about, oh gosh, what's the title? I'm going to blank, but it's like, how are you really? It's called How Are You Really or something like that. But it's like about, it's not about marketing at all. But like her audience just cares about her, and she managed to sell that. So,
Yep.
So traditional publishers really kind of leave it to the author to do a lot of publicity work. I imagine you guys are in the process of doing a lot of publicity work. Like, why do we need a traditional publisher then if we're going to be doing all this boot work? What does a publisher do that an author can't do for themselves? And how much of that is reputation and how much is paying for a publicity department?
I mean, I think the big advantage of traditional publisher is distribution. So a traditional publisher is going to have they're going to be able to make your book available in spaces that you will not be able to make your book available as an individual, self-publisher, or even through some, hybrid publishers. So distribution is a really, really key piece of it. If you want any hope of your book being at a bookstore or being at an airport or being on a bestseller list, you're going to need to go through a traditional publisher just to have those avenues even available to you. It's no guarantee that you're going to get onto any of those things or you're going to get any of those things. But to even have the option, traditional publishing is going to be the path. The other thing is that traditional publishers have this is the industry, right? So they know what works and what doesn't, and they have really, really dedicated, talented, experienced teams of people who really do love books. Like, I don't think that is, lots of business complaints can be made about working with a publisher or working with any partner in any industry. But I do think that one thing that is special about traditional publishing is that as an author, you get to work with every single person on that team loves books. They're in the industry because they genuinely love books and they love your book. That's why they agreed to it. So that's really special. And just to have access to all of these really talented people, I think is very cool. It's one of the main reasons why I love working in traditional publishing and wanted to come back to traditional publishing after being in the freelance world for a few years.
I love that. My book, 7 Drafts, that came out a few years ago, I was debating whether to self-publish it because I had a fairly large, pretty engaged audience, or whether to go with a traditional publisher. And I ended up going with a traditional publisher. And if I'm going to be 100% honest, I'm probably making less money off the book than I would make if I had just sold it myself. But I needed that endorsement from a traditional publisher that the places where I want to speak, the places where I want to teach, traditional publisher is a badge of a credibility that lets me enter into that space. And so if you want to do something that involves leveraging your book as, oh, hey, now I'm an expert and you should have me teach, you should have me speak, you should take my course, you should do this, it can be really helpful to have that little I approve of you mark.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. There's, a much higher standard of vetting that books go through with traditional publishers. And so it is a mark of credibility, just because it's had to go through so much more vetting to get that far.
I have a question that's a little bit sideways here from the topic, and it is what happens once you're working with editors in a traditional publishing house. I think you have more back and forth with editors than you do in some literary journals, let's say. How important is the communication that you have with your editor? Is there ever been a book project that's been dropped because the writer wasn't very receptive to changes? I mean, I often wonder about that relationship. Can you speak to that?
Yes, definitely. Yes, books do get dropped sometimes when, an author's like, I'm not on board for whatever change you're proposing. And sometimes that, is a bad thing. And sometimes it's, the publisher is really trying. I'm biased. I'm speaking from the publisher's perspective. Like, often a publisher is never going to do that just for fun. They're going to do that because they truly believe that whatever they're suggesting is going to make the book better. So that's something you have to kind of take into consideration. And I do think that if you are like, I absolutely cannot release any creative control over my work, then you should not work with a traditional publisher, because it is a partnership and you're going to be making decisions together. And you are going to need to, respect the expertise of your publishing team. So yes, book contracts do occasionally get dropped. It's super rare. It's super, super rare. Like, at my former company, I think I had it happen in, like, with my book specifically, like 3 times in almost 10 years. Like, it's very rare. Publisher is going to do everything they can to work with you and to find a compromise and, just make it happen however it can happen. You also should, and this is why I mentioned, like, you should ask your editor before you sign with a publisher, like, what does communication look like? Who will I be able to communicate with? Because some publishers are like, you can only communicate with the editor. So if you have a marketing question, ask your editor, and then your editor will ask the marketer, and then it'll be 2 weeks later when you'll get a final response. And if so sometimes communication can be very slow, depending on the publisher and just, again, that particular publisher's culture. But other publishers, you have access to more people, and so you can get responses a little bit more quickly. It all just kind of depends. Yeah, does that kind of answer that question?
I mean, yes, I think it is. I mean, it is kind of vague. It is a relationship, so I'm sure it varies from person to person. I just remember hearing from an editor at one time saying that, they had not necessarily someone that was truculent to change, but was very late on making the changes that they need to make, and not responsive to emails, and that really made her resonant to not want to work with them anymore. So I think that relationship is important to foster goodwill in.
Definitely. Yeah.
And that's something to ask on the way in. You might ask a publisher when you're talking to them, what kind of editorial feedback do you see happening? How do you see us working together? As a writer, I have drafted my own feedback people for chapters. As an editor, I recently worked on a book chapter by chapter that is coming out as a well-positioned book with a large advance from a major publishing house. And yet she paid me to go through it chapter by chapter with her, which means either the editor was not giving her as much as she needed, or she wanted more than the editor thought was appropriate to give. And I'm not saying I don't know anything about her relationship with her actual editor, but, Allison Lane points out in the chat, editor is a broad title, but the editor is not your writing partner. Whereas I was
Yes.
going line by line through these chapters and word by word. Jan Pretty also points out in the chat that she's not getting to design her cover despite having years of experience as a designer. And that's one thing too, where we all kind of have to step back and go, our expertise in one area is not necessarily our expertise in another area. The designers at the bookstore, at the publishers, they know what's selling now and they know what's likely to be selling 18 months from now.
Yeah. Yeah, that also happens with audio. Like a friend of ours is a podcaster. She is a professional musician. She has a lot of experience doing professional, sound, whatever. I'm not in that world, so I don't know. But anyway, she was like, she had her heart set on narrating her audiobook and did not get to do it. And that was, that was a blow. That was something she had to really wrestle with. And so just, it is a partnership. You are giving up creative control. But there's benefits to it too. So you just have to decide what you can live with.
We are getting near the end of our time. Sharla, are there any questions we should tackle?
I'm not seeing any of them right now in the chat. I'm sorry if you put one in the chat and we lost it. If you can always put it back in, you can find it. Thank you, Ariel, for popping in your newsletter list link. So if anyone wants to join the newsletter with Ariel and Liz, please do follow that link. Thank you.
That was, I just wanted, because we were talking about like publisher expectations, that was an article that I wrote, I think a couple of years ago, based on a podcast series from an author who was very publicly upset about her publishing experience. And a lot of the things that she experienced were just kind of like, that's just kind of how the industry is. Mm-hmm. So I always want authors to go into it with open eyes and knowing what you can expect and what it's realistically going to be like. And if you have a good expectation, it can be a fantastic experience. But if you are going and expecting one thing and it is drastically different, then you might find that to be disconcerting.
Yeah. And we would definitely say, ask questions. When you have that initial talk with the agent, with the publisher, ask lots and lots of questions. In just a moment, we're going to tell you the 3 things you can do today to help yourself prepare to move forward in your writing career towards traditional publishing. We will tackle additional questions in the chat, in the YouTube description, if we possibly can. We do want to say, do join us at Craft Talks. Sharla, what's our Craft Talks webinar this week?
It's Supercharge Your Narrative. No. Supercharge Your Writing, and it's about narrative distance. It's with Peter Mountford, and I'll put that link again in the chat.
Awesome. And as I mentioned, Rebecca Morrison and I are going to be teaching a 2-week masterclass on pitching and publishing essays, and my favorite part, writing faster. And I'm also doing a free talk with Allison Lane on LinkedIn on Thursday about 4 tips for writing memoir, and Allison has dropped that link into the chat. So join us for our next episode in September. We'll tell you what it's going to be when we know what it's going to be. What can our community do today as writers to move forward in their writing and publishing career? Liz, what can they do today?
I would say start reading books in your genre. That's the first thing I always tell people when they come to me and they say, I have a book idea. and I want to write such and such. I say, great, you want to write a self-help book. What are some other self-help books that you've read and liked? And if they haven't read any, that's kind of a red flag. You need to know what's happening in the marketplace. You need to know what's happening in your genre. If you want to write fiction, I mean, if you want to write like romance, go read some romance books. You can just start with what's like on the top of the New York Times list, just go, whatever, search some on Amazon. But if you haven't done that, go buy some books in your genre, get familiar with what your contemporaries are doing, and that will help you a lot.
Ariel, what can writers do today?
Similarly, when you're reading all of your comp books, practice identifying their big ideas. See if you can find the big ideas in other books. And I'll give you a hint, especially for prescriptive nonfiction, the big idea is almost always located in the introduction after the hook. So after, however they start their introduction, it's going to be right there, probably in the first, page or two of the introduction. So, and if you're reading a memoir, then it's probably going to be somewhere close to the end of the book. So practice finding the big idea in other people's books and use whatever you learn to help you refine your big idea.
Love that. Sharla, what would you suggest from what we've taken away today?
Those are great suggestions. And I would say, engage with your writing community, connect with other writers and industry professionals through like LinkedIn, online forums, social media, local writing groups, stay informed, and it will really also help you to stay motivated and to do those things that you might be putting off, such as that writing proposal that is not quite as fun as writing.
For those of you who are asking in the chat, yes, we will put the links that have been dropped in the chat into the YouTube description. We no longer send the replay the next day because those were the emails we got the most unsubscribes on, but you do have our archives over on YouTube. That link is in the email you got that got you here. As you are moving into the world with your writing, think about your big idea, because the thing that you care passionately about, you're not the only person who cares passionately about it, but you might be the only person who has the power to tell that story in writing in a way that other people can receive and discover what they need to know about the journey that you have already taken. And you can help them discover their big idea by thinking more about your big idea. We would love to hear about your big ideas on social media. Please do join Ariel and Liz's email list. And we hope to see you at a Craft Talks webinar, at our LinkedIn talk, at all kinds of stuff coming up. Ariel and Liz, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so honored to have you. And everyone, please unmute yourselves for a joyful goodbye.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Again.
Thank you.
Everybody's sweet
Bye.
voices. Yay.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Allison, I'll see you Thursday on LinkedIn.
Yeah, see you soon.
Hey,
Thank you, Allison
Marilyn.
and Sharla. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Marilyn, I thought I felt your witchy energy.
I'm right here with you. Sparks.